Two new central bank decisions are giving investors hope that interest rates have peaked. The Bank of England held its benchmark rate steady today at 5.25%. The ECB also paused at 4%. The ECB President Christine Lagarde said rates might stay there for some time to come.
I think everybody in the room takes the view that between hike and cut, there's a whole plateau, whole beach of hold. You know, it's like, I don't know, solid, liquid, gas. You don't go from solid to gas without going through the liquid phase.
So now we all know. Eurozone inflation, look at that. You've got the UK slightly elevated, more elevated actually, and you've got the EU inflation, but both are still above target. Now, UK inflation has also been coming down, not as fast as you can see, 4.6%. We'll have the November reading on UK inflation next week. There are those who see it now as only a matter of time, probably sooner rather than later, that the central banks start cutting rates. You'll remember we talked about this with the IMF Deputy Managing Director, the pivot as it's known. Well, the message from this week's central bankers is don't get ahead of yourselves on pivoting.
We did not discuss rate cuts at all.
There is more to do. So I'm encouraged by where we are, but we have got more to do to get to that target, and that's what we will do.
We'll have a ways to go. No one is declaring victory. That would be premature, and we can't be guaranteed of this progress. So we're moving carefully in making that assessment of whether we need to do more or not.
And yet, the chief UK economist at UBS said he expects the Bank of England to cut rates in May. Many European traders think the ECB will go earlier in March. Vanguard has said it expects US rates to come down in the second half of the year. But then, of course, remember the dot plot and what we saw, there could be 3 rate cuts in the US next year. Paul Romer is going to make sense of it all. The Nobel Prize winning economist joins me. I mean, there is this inherent contradiction between saying there's more to be done, but we're not going to raise rates further, and anyway, we're cutting them next year.
No, there's not. That makes no sense, Richard. I mean, think about a plane which is descending. You know, it's in a steady descent, and you don't keep pulling back the throttle while it's descending. You wait till you get to the place where you're going to level off. But you also start to bring the throttle back in before you get to the level where you're going to level off, which is what the Fed needs to keep doing. I've been on their show I've come on for a year now, and I've been saying, look, inflation is steadily decreasing. I hope now that the Fed has said it, you'll finally recognize it's steadily decreasing.
All right,
and we got to the point where we're going to say, okay, that's enough, and we got to start leveling off.
Okay, but can you level off? Can you level off and still have inflation come down to target of 2%? Because what they are all saying is we're not at target.
Yeah, but again, I don't think you're listening. Just think about a plane. It's steadily decreasing, 1,000 feet per minute, okay? You're going to level off at 10,000 feet. As when you get to 12,000, 11,000, you don't cut the throttles and before you get to 10, you actually start putting the power back in so you can level off at 10. So I think we're at about 3% inflation right now. The trailing, 12-month average is 4%. It's been coming down at a rate about 15 basis points per month. So that means if the average over 12 months was 4%, that was 4% 6 months ago. It's 3% now. We're going to be at 2% in 6 months. So it's time to get ready.
How fast should cuts come? Now we saw, we've seen dot plots, we've seen what the Fed thinks. How fast do you think the plane should start its descent?
Oh, I think they should start looking at cutting. If you look at the number of increases that they put in place, They should start cutting at the next meeting. And remember, when inflation comes down, the difference between your interest rate that the Fed is setting and inflation gets bigger. So the real rate is getting bigger. Rates are still actually going up. So I think they should have cut at this meeting. They should certainly start cutting at the next meeting.
Talking to the other major world central bank, the ECB. Now, Christine Lagarde is to a certain extent, well, she is in the same position of saying, more work to be done. But the common view is the ECB will go earlier than the Fed.
Well, I have not studied the European inflation as closely as the U.S. inflation, but
Yep.
Look, inflation's been falling for more than a year in the United States. But if you compare like the year before inflation rates, 11 out of the last 12 months have had a lower inflation rate than the one before. So there's no question that we're on the decline now. I don't think it's as clear cut in Europe.
The typical of us pesky journalists, we're not one crisis is over and we immediately need to know about the next. So
Right.
if we've had the terminal rate at the top, where do you think we're going to bottom out? Whether it be 24, 25, where are we headed to at the bottom, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's not clear, and I want to be clear here. I am not a forecaster. I'm just reporting what I see in the data now. We won't know about how low rates will need to go until we start cutting rates. I think it's quite possible that rates will level off at a level which is higher than they were because we went through a very unusual period with nominal rates that were, virtually zero. So it may well be that we get to nominal rates of, at 2%, 2.5%, and we might level off there, and that would be fine.
Paul, for an aviation geek like me, your analogy was absolutely spot on, and we're delighted to have you, as always, on Quest Means Business. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.